Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, Ph.D., and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving, purpose-minded women who've written nonfiction books and want to amplify their message beyond the book. I'm a college professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to use their books to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and purpose. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here and listening into the podcast. As always, I really appreciate you for doing that. And I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts about the podcast. If you'd like to hear something different that you haven't heard or you're appreciating what you do here from week to week on the episodes, go on over to my social media and send me a message and let me know at Robin L. Owens, Ph.D., Robin L. Owens, Ph.D. All right, so let's just jump right into today's episode. Let me ask you the question that frames our episode for today. Is imposter syndrome a real thing for authors? Well, we'll get to that more as we go throughout the episode. But let me share with you a story from my own experience that I think shed some light on it, at least for my experience. And many times in past episodes, I share about myself, and I often talk about growing up in Connecticut and share different stories about my mother. So this story is about one of my mother's teaching. Until recently, I thought about this particular story in a different way. So let me just jump in and then we can talk about it. All right. So I grew up with one brother and one sister and just about 2 years in between us. And I'm right in the middle. I was right in the middle. Yeah. The stereotype of the middle child. That was me. So anyway, my sister and I were really good students growing up. We just excelled academically. My brother struggled because in his early life, he had been in an accident when he had been hit by a car, and it left him paralyzed for a long time. And doctors didn't expect him to actually live or survive, and he did. But it left him with some brain damage. So he struggled for a long time. He was able to go back to school. At this time, he was probably like in 5th grade. So he was able to go back to school and function, but he didn't have the full capacity that he had before the accident. So that gives you a little background. And so meanwhile, my sister and I, we both were excelling academically in school. So my parents created a system of motivation, I guess, to reward whoever got the best grades. So back then they called them report cards. I don't know what they call them now in elementary school, but anyway, whoever got the best grades on their report card, right? And so my sister and I would kind of trade places. Each time we would get all A's and one of us would get 1 B or 2 B's. So we would switch back. Either she'd get a B or I get 2 B's or 1 B and back and forth. And my brother, he struggled. So he was oftentimes, especially in the earlier periods after the accident, he had gotten F's, and then he kind of graduated up to more D's and C's, and he was just kind of struggling his way along. So then one period when we got our report cards, my sister and I were, because I think they gave us a small amount of money. I can't remember what it was. Let's say like it was $20 or something. So we would trade off getting this reward. So this one period, my mother gave the reward to my brother. I mean, my sister and I still had all A's and one of us had a B or 2. And he finally got to the point where he didn't have any F's or D's. And so my mother decided that he was the one that was going to get this reward for having the best report card. And I said, that's not fair. That's not fair. Why did he get it? And she said, because for him, that's like getting A's because of his ability. For you, and she's talking to me and my sister, Leanne, for you two, if you get A's and B's, you're working at your capacity, and especially A's. But if you get a C, you have failed because you're not working up to your ability. And so, I kind of grumbled. My sister and I grumbled like, why does he get the money? We didn't understand this lesson. And so then fast forward as an adult, I thought, oh, okay, she was really seeing our ability and encouraging us to live up to our ability, right? And to work up to our ability. And she gave us the high expectations so we would meet the expectations, and we did. And so for years I thought that was wonderful. And I still think it was. But then recently I thought about the pressure that probably came with that. Even though I venture to say this is true for my sister too, that we had to work at it, but it came easily. Pretty much academics came easily to us. But still, it took work, right? And so for years I thought, well, that was wonderful that she set those expectations. So we had high expectations and we achieved in different areas of our life. But then recently I started thinking about the impact of the pressure of that and the lens that it put on my own eyes and my perspective. So I began to think about that and think about the ways where it showed up, the ways it showed up in other areas of my life, and it skewed my perspective. So in my mind, if whatever I was doing wasn't the equivalent of an A, to me, it was almost like failing. Now, granted, she said C. She didn't say if you didn't get an A. But in my mind, if I didn't do the things just right or at the top or the best of the best, then in my mind, I have fallen short. And so then I began not to be able to see what was good enough, for example. So when it got to a point where most other people would say, well, this is great, I couldn't even see it. My perspective was skewed because I'm always looking at this sort of top tier of whatever the thing is. And I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, I released a new book. And that when I was doing the research from that book, I kept doing it. I mean, I feel like it probably took, I would say at least 3 times longer than it should have to be finished, because I couldn't quite tell when it was done and when the good enough was good enough. And it probably was good enough long before the time I finished it. But I'm looking back now and thinking that I had this perspective, this way of looking at things because of my mother. I just couldn't see when it was enough. All right. So now I bring that up to think about this question of imposter syndrome. Is it a real thing? Is it a real thing for authors? And I would say, stay tuned for the answer for that until the end of the episode. All right. So let's define it. Let's say, what is imposter syndrome? And I have notes here on the definition, so I could read it to you. All right. So imposter syndrome is a pattern of thinking. A pattern of thinking. That's what happens in your mind, like what happened to me. You doubt your skills and fear that you'll be exposed as a phony, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Now, in my case, I don't know that I was thinking about being exposed as a phony, but this pattern of self-doubt just seeped in because it wasn't quite good enough yet. It had to be at that top level, which it may have been already. All right, so let me give you more about the definition. Imposter syndrome was introduced in an article by Georgia State University's Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes in 1978. 1978. So we're hearing a lot about it now, but it's been around for a long time. But back then, the syndrome was first studied in high-achieving women. And in decades since, the syndrome has been readily reported across genders. So in a nutshell, imposter syndrome is a mental pattern of self-doubt. And you have this nagging feeling in the back of your mind that if people look too closely, they realize you have no idea what you are doing, that you're not qualified, let's say, to write or publish a book, that you're not qualified to do the thing, whatever you're doing. And it really is an extension of self-doubt. Imposter syndrome is an extension of self-doubt. It's that feeling that despite the number of books you've written or the level of achievements or awards or promotions, you feel the sense that you're just kind of pretending and people just don't know it. And, you know, it's amazing to know that this is common, not just with high achieving women, as I mentioned earlier, or just across genders, but especially for our conversation today, successful authors. This is common among successful authors. And I'll give you a couple of examples that I took notes on here. One that you may have heard about or might be a surprise to you is Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama, and I have a quote here from her. She says, and this is a direct quote from her in Newsweek. She reported this in Newsweek. She says, I still have a little imposter syndrome. It doesn't go away, that feeling that you shouldn't take me that seriously. What do I know? That's what she was saying to herself. Like, what do I know? Why are people taking me so seriously? And then she says, I share that with you because we all have doubts in our abilities about our power and what that power is. So that's Michelle Obama in Newsweek talking about her bouts of imposter syndrome. And she says she still has a little. And I would pause here to say, it shows up at times, probably in particular areas of our life and or work. I wouldn't say it's across the board. You know, it's not a way of thinking. Like for me, and probably like many people who achieve, we have a strong sense of self and confidence, but there are some areas where, and sometimes, or some projects, or some particular ways that it shows up periodically. And so that was Michelle Obama. All right, so let me give you another example from Sheryl Sandberg, who is the author of the book Lean In. And this is what she says. Every time I was called on in class, I was sure that I was about to embarrass myself. Every time I took a test, I was sure that it had gone badly. And every time I didn't embarrass myself or even excelled, I believed that I had fooled everyone yet again. One day, soon, she says, the jig would be up. So this is her talking about her experiences, and she goes on to say, this phenomenon of capable people being plagued by self-doubt has a name, the imposter syndrome. And she says both men and women are prone to imposter syndrome, but women tend to experience it more intensely and be more limited by it. And that's Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. So again, it shows up, you know, I think no matter what area of life we achieve in, but we're focusing on authors because this is the topic of our conversation and our these episodes. All right, so let me give you one more example from an author. It is from Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou, believe it or not, right? The author and poet and all around phenomenal woman. See what I did there? All right, so here's a quote from Maya Angelou. She says, I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. That's Maya Angelou. Can you believe that? That's the one that's most surprising to me. They're all surprising in some ways, but it just is an illustration that women who achieve and who have done things often have this mental pattern of thinking of self-doubt that comes in at times. It may not be all the time. It could be sometimes, but there's a portion of it to some extent or another that creeps in. And the reason why I'm talking about it today, to help us all together as we're listening, to think about it and to catch it when it shows up in our own lives and work. So we could pay attention and be aware, because awareness helps us move forward. So we have the awareness, then we can do something about it. And if we have the awareness, we can keep it from stopping us in our tracks, not letting it keep us from moving forward in our goals, so we can stay in alignment with the work we've been called to do. And so here's 3 ways. When you're paying attention to imposter syndrome and when it pops up in your life, here are 3 ways to keep yourself moving forward and not be distracted, deterred, or stopped by it. Okay, here's number 1. Acknowledge what you're feeling. Acknowledge it by writing about it. You can write about it in a journal or however you write, just kind of getting it out. It's kind of getting this into your consciousness so you can be aware and then release it. All right. Or you could share it with a trusted friend. You know, if you don't want to write in your journal, just kind of talk about it. Again, it brings it up into your consciousness. And once it's in your consciousness, you can actually address it or help move past it in those times. Another way, second way to kind of deal with imposter syndrome is Review your successes. We've all had something that we've done well. If you're having this self-doubt in an area of writing or publishing, think about what people have said. Read the reviews. Look at any accolades, any promotions, anything anybody has said or written that speaks to the opposite of your self-doubt. So review your successes. Somebody told me once, create a file and just keep all the positive feedback, reviews, evaluations that people have given to you, and then periodically go back and review those. So I would say that during the time of self-doubt, this would be a good time to do that. I don't know that I was actually having self-doubt, but I was having a bit of fatigue. As you know, I'm still teaching. I'm a university professor, tenure professor. And at the time of this recording, it's toward the end of our semester. I'm doing a lot of grading, and which comes with a lot of fatigue. For me, it's not one of my favorite things to do, but it's important, right? And so as I'm finishing up the grading and working on that, the students who are commenting, they kind of they submit a evaluation to the university. So I asked them to go ahead and submit the evaluation. It's anonymous. Because it's anonymous, I don't know who does it or what later we get a report about what they say. But as I encourage them to do that, some of them wrote me messages to say, thank you for being an amazing professor, or I've learned so much. This was very interesting. It challenged me, but, and so to hear that, not just the accolades, that they were pouring forth, but it helped me to realize that my work was not, and my efforts were not in vain. And so that gave me a little bit of motivation to continue to do the hard work of grading. I say hard because, it's not my favorite thing to do. And so because I had that, it allowed me to keep moving forward. So I'm telling you the power of reviewing your successes. And so when the other patterns of doubt come in, self-doubt or this imposter syndrome, in the traditional way of understanding it, when it creeps in, review your successes. So first one was acknowledge it, write it out, or talk with someone that you trust. Second, review your successes. It really takes some time and let it sink in and take belief of those. And the last thing, and the third and last thing I would say is to keep going. Just keep going. Don't let that moment, season, period of self-doubt keep you from moving forward. Just keep going. Don't let it stop you from doing the work, from pursuing your goals, from moving forward in your business, for pursuing your mission and your purpose. Don't let it keep you from continuing to grow in your business. Just keep going. All right. Just keep going. Don't stop. Don't let it get the best of you. All right. So that's the end of our episode today. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that and imposter syndrome. And why don't you tell me, is imposter syndrome a real thing for authors? Let me know on social media, Robin L. Owens, Ph.D., and I'd love to hear from you. And if you are an author and you want to expand your message, you want to expand your knowledge, and you're thinking about ways you want to figure out how to leverage your time, how to increase your income, expand your reach, I have a way you can do that. Just go on over to my free 4-part training on how to turn your book into a masterful course. It's a way to have more reach, leverage your audience, your income, your knowledge in a way that I think you would find enjoyable. So go on over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and sign up for my free training on how to turn your book into a masterful course. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.